Hello, good morning, everyone. Dear participants online and in person from Copenhagen, dear guests, ladies and gentlemen, dear speakers, tech hosts, note takers, interpreters, good morning, and welcome to our session, Rethink State-Nation Relationship for Sound Human Security, co-hosted by the Geneva Center for Security Sector Governance, DCAF, and the United Nations University Merit. My name is Fatoumata Sira Diallo. I'm the DCAF country representative and team leader in the Democratic Republic of Congo, where we are implementing an European program funded by the European Union to support the government of Congo to reform its national police. I am an expert of the Great Lake region and West Africa in the field of international development, security sector governance, human security, and community empowerments. I've been working in this field for more than 2 decades. Today, we are going to talk about human security and also about the social contract. I will be co-leading this session with Ms. Kuljan, and I would like to invite her to introduce herself as well. Hello, good morning, Kuljan, how are you?
Hi, Fatimata and everyone, thanks. So yes, my name is Guljan. I'm Guljana Subiaquzai. I'm a PhD candidate at the UNU Merit, the United Nations University here in Maastricht, the Netherlands. So as mentioned, I'll be a co-lead for this session. And I also wanted to use this opportunity to thank the Knowledge Management Platform on behalf of our speakers in organizing this conference and for bringing us together, and also for providing the technical support. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Kuljan. Okay, before we start, I think it's really important that we define some ground rules to enable us to have a dynamic and fruitful session. So first, to ensure that we have a smooth and fruitful session, we have Ms. Liliana, who is our tech host. Liliana, could you just say hello to everyone?
Hi, hello everyone.
Okay, so Liliana, we're gonna ensure that everything goes smoothly. We don't have any technical issues. So just stay with us and everything's gonna be fine. And also kindly note that we have some translation from English and French. So just to allow us to understand what we are talking about and also to facilitate our debate and enable everyone to be able to participate. So please just look at the bottom of your screen. You will be able to choose either in French or English. So maybe before I continue, I just want to ensure that you can see the bottom of your screen and you can choose either in French or in English. And if you don't understand, just please let me know. Okay, Ibrahima, do you have any issue? Ibrahima, ça va? Tu as levé la main. Ibrahima, tu nous entends?
Oui, je voulais signaler que la voix du traducteur est un peu basse. S'il peut l'élever un peu. Voilà. Mais je vous ai entendu, c'était assez bas quand même.
En fait, Ibrahima, tu peux, si tu souhaites, tu vas directement
voilà,
dans...
là, c'est excellent.
C'est bon?
C'est excellent.
OK.
Voilà, c'est bon maintenant.
Okay, any other one has any issues? Like if you have any issue, kindly raise your hand.
No.
Okay. Okay, so this session is comprised in 2 parts. Like we have a plenary and with a great team of experts and practitioners who will gonna share their insight and analysis about the social contract. And then we will be split into 2 groups discussions where you will also have the opportunity to share your own views and experiences. And also if you have any questions for the speakers, But I would like just to invite you not to wait until the end of the intervention of all speakers to share your comments and questions. So like you can use the chat button and send your questions or comment at any time during this plenary session. But prior to starting, I would like first to launch a first poll. So I would like to invite our co-host, co-tech host to Liliana to launch the poll. You have like less than half a minute to complete the poll. Okay, so has everybody has completed the poll? Okay, great. Liliana, could you just share the results? In addition to displaying them, could you tell us directly what are the results, please?
So it looks like some people voted, not everyone did, but overall people are somewhat familiar with the social contract and its applications before this conference.
Okay, great, interesting. Do everyone wanted to complete the poll, or some of you have had any issue completing the poll? I'm just asking the question to the participant. Just let us know if you have had any issue completing the poll. Just please raise your hand or just send a comment on the chat button, please. Thank you. But actually, it's really important. It's really interesting to see that everyone is almost familiar with the social contract. They know what it is about. So it's going to make this session more vibrant and more dynamic, and the discussion. So I'm looking forward to more discussion with the people. Yes, as Liliana said, if you didn't get a chance to vote in the poll, feel free to write in the chat and make your comment, please. Thank you. Liliana, you can just end the display of the result. Thank you. Now let's start and get into business. To be able to do that, we would like to share a video with you, giving you some idea about what we are going to talk about. So Liliana, you have, could you just launch the video, please? Thank you. Hello, Liliana, could you hear me? Liliana?
Just checking, is the video sharing on people's screens with audio, or was that without audio? We'll try one more time to launch it with the audio.
Okay, try to launch with the video and audio at the same time, please. You know, as I was saying at the beginning, sometimes we can have some technical issues, logistical, but those things happen. But Liliana, you should.
Was there an issue, Fatimata, or was the video sharing okay?
Yes, but you should share the video. It has stopped.
Okay, we'll continue now.
Okay. Go ahead. Hey, thank you. Okay, so welcome everyone. I hope that you have found this video interesting, and it's a good starter for our session. Well, the social contract is about citizens and their governing leaders. It is about trust and values. It is about social protection. And it is about, the social contract is about public services, citizen well-being and safety. Then what happened when trust between the rulers and the ruled has totally crumbled? And what about the social fabric that has cracked? These are some of the points that we're gonna cover during this session. I have a great team of experts, friends, practitioners who have been working in the field, and also academics who are gonna share their insights and analysis about the social contract, about fragility, social institutions. And so then I would like to invite all of them to introduce themselves. So I will start with Ibrahima. Ibrahima, could you introduce yourself, please? Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. Je m'appelle Ibrahima Niane. Je suis consultant dans le domaine de la gouvernance démocratique. J'ai une expérience dans le secteur de presque 40 ans et plus, parce que j'ai été fonctionnaire parlementaire pendant plus de 31 ans. J'ai été expert du PNUD dans le cadre de la gouvernance politique. Et je suis à mes heures maintenant consultant et du PNUD et de l'Union interparlementaire. J'ai fait beaucoup de consultance dans le domaine. Voilà brièvement comment je peux me présenter.
Thank you very much, Ibrahima. Zina Nimet?
Yes, hello, good morning, bonjour. My name is Zina Nime. I'm an associate professor at Maastricht University and the United Nations University, who we are also with the DCAF sponsoring this event here. My specialization is in public policy, but I also focus a lot on social policy with regional focus in the Middle East and in the emerging market context. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Zinat. Hajia Mumina Tujara.
Yes, good morning. My name is Haja. I studied business administration with a specialty in marketing in Lyon, France. Then I lived in Philadelphia for a few years where I furthered my studies and learned a lot about personal development. I'm currently a program coordinator for La Fondation Aide, also known as Ensemble pour le Développement. Thank you.
Thank you, Hacha. Marina Caparini.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Marina, and I'm director of the Governance and Society program at the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute. My background is security sector reform and governance, but also peace operations and peace building. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Marina. And Kai Thompson.
Thank you. My name is Kai Thompson. I'm the director of bachelor programs at School of Business and Economics at Maastricht University, where I've also developed an emerging markets program. My interest is in the intersection of politics and economics with issues closely related to the topics that we're using here. And I'm not actually speaking, but I will be part of synthesizing the discussion afterwards and trying to bring some of these ideas into our education at Maastricht University.
Thank you very much, Kai, and thank you all the speakers. As you can see, there is a variety of expertise and experience. So like from a field practitioner working with NGOs, working with academic, the university, institutions, with government. So like we will have like a really interesting session. So like we are looking forward to the debate. And once again, I would like to invite you, don't hesitate to make your comments, send your questions using the chat button. So this is it. It's gonna be like a really interesting session. Thank you. So like some main objective of the session, we are going to discuss about the notions of social contract, state fragility, citizens participation, and good governance and human security. We will try to explain why we are imagining the social contracts matters. The session will discuss new perspective for a fairer and more binding social contract. Those are some of the objectives that we would like to cover during this session. So like I'm gonna start just to give you some insight about the social contract and human security. What are the links? When you look at the picture, you see like that the social fabric has cracks. And at the right hand, you see what people expect from their leaders, from the governments. Because like when you talk about social contract, it's mean like the citizens have willingly and agreed to give up a part of their freedom for liberty, for their well-being, and for their safety. And the Lord or the government has the mission and the responsibility to provide them with public goods and security. But more and more we see that this is not what is happening. This is not the reality, and more we see that people are not living safe. They are not out of danger. They are not out of needs. Globally, we deal with the new actors of insecurity. We deal with new challenges in terms of education, in terms of social protection, in terms of food security, in terms of peace, and in terms of environments. So like we have so many security issues that we are dealing with, and the Lord or the government or our leaders who are supposed to protect the people are not really able to do their work. So now what should be, how people gonna react about that? And so this is time, we think it is time to rethink the relationship between the ruled and the rulers. And even it is also time to think about the relationship among the ruled, because this is not only about the leaders and the people, but it is also about the people themselves and also about the services. And it is time to think about relationship at the horizontal level and also at the vertical level, because it's really important. And this is where I think human security is really important. What is human security? We can say that the definition of security has evolved over the years. For the last, I will say, 3 decades, we have switched from a more classical definition of security, where the state was the center and the object of security, because that meant providing security to the government or the state means that the people also are feel safe and secure. But over the times, we found out that this is not the reality, and we found a need to change that approach and broaden the definition of security. And this is where we, the definition of security switched from state-centered security to people-centered security. And meaning what? Meaning human security means to live out of fear and out of need and out of danger. It means to be an active actor in the management of the person's security. It also means that many sectors are concerned, like environment, like economy, like the political, and like food. It also means like everyone is concerned about security, not only the government, not only the institutions, but also the communities, which is really important, because if the Lord is supposed to protect and provide safety and security, it means he has to know what are the needs of the people. He has to know what are their needs in terms of living and feeling secure. And so the notion and maybe concept of security, peace and development, and also human rights are totally interconnected, because you have to consider all those aspects to make sure that people live out of fear and out of danger. So the human security approach is people-centered, and it considers all conditions that threaten the survival, livelihood, and dignity of people, particularly those who are the most vulnerable. And the human security approach also offers a comprehensive framework for the development of integrated politics and programs to prevent, mitigate, and respond to complex challenges. Now, the good thing. The good thing is everybody has already accepted the broadening of the definition of security. Today, everybody knows that human security is really important. However, since the 90s, despite the broadening of security to human security, nothing has been changed much on the ground. Like everyone tend to forget the two building blocks of human security: protection and empowerment. Those are really important. We need to protect, and we need to ensure that people have the minimum, are skilled, have the competency to actively participate in the process. Today, we need to move from principle to practice. So this is the reason why it is really important to reimagine, to rethink the social contract and see how we are going to change and improve people's lives. For instance, at DCAF, the Geneva Center for Security Sector Governance, we work both at the institutional level, at the holistical level, and at the political level to consider all the actors. Each group of actors has an important role to play, like the government, like the civil society organizations, like the communities, and also the parliamentarians who are representing the people. So everybody need to work together hand in hand and to make things happen and to make things change. So without going much on detail, those are the insights that I wanted to share with you, talking about social contract and the human security, and just set the ground, and now invite my colleague Kunjan to take the floor. Kunjan, you're going to talk about the state and institution fragility and the concept of the social contract. Welcome.
Yes, thank you. Thanks, Fatimata. So this is a good transition for me to talk about to try to mainstream different elements that you mentioned in your reflections about the human security and the citizen perspective and the horizontal level, and to talk about it in the context of fragile environments. I'll be relatively brief. So I'll give a broad overview about fragility in general and how state-society relation fits our understanding of it. So this is part of research that is based on my ongoing PhD work, where I mainly focus on different inequalities and state fragility at large. So to situate us in this fragile and conflict-affected context, there is an emerging body of evidence that came from post-conflict and fragile countries, and including important findings from the World Development Report of 2011, from which we've learned that conflict and violence does not only happen in poor countries, as we also see it in middle-income places. And so to reflect that, our understanding of fragility has been also constantly evolving in both academic and policy community. And it has really moved from perceiving fragility as the lack of capacity, as the lack of administrative or institutional capacity, to now fragility being understood as risk, or countries being at risk, or the ones that need the resilience building approach. And we see these elements of risk and resilience building in the efforts to measure, rank, and monitor different countries that we think the international community should be mindful of the most. And so in this respect, I have a few issues I wanted to highlight. The first being the persistence of fragility. So as we know, there are a lot of good initiatives to measure and monitor fragile countries, where we have different organizations producing annual rankings and publishing their data openly. But we still lack knowledge about different types of fragility and why it persists in some countries but is avoided in others. And later in the session, we're going to hear interesting perspectives from Zina on her insights from the Middle East and North African region, which is a good example for looking at the persistence and of different types of fragility as well. So there's still room for improving our efforts to measure fragility and consider the multidimensional nature that we're seeing more empirically, and also to build in a more theoretical and solid framework that could capture the state-society interaction in our understanding of fragility. Then what I also think we need to explore more is how variations in fragility can contribute to different pathways to resilience. So the next point that I wanted to highlight is on the so-called horizontal inequalities, or what scholars also refer to as group-based inequalities in fragile countries, as we see different inequalities rising and deepening not only in countries with ongoing conflict, but also in non-conflict countries and fragile or brittle, or the ones that are on the brink of falling into fragility. So there's been some recent interesting studies coming out recently that show us that political inequalities and social exclusion matter more in leading to conflict than economic inequalities. So it seems like the group-based inequalities or group identity is mobilizing people for conflict, and in cases, for instance, where particular groups are being excluded from access to justice or to some basic services, or from being engaged in political processes. So it really becomes important to unpack these deep inequalities that can ultimately undermine the legitimacy of institutions, of both formal and informal institutions, and the rule of law, which we know are the main pillars of governance. And finally, it's really important to maintain the existing social contract, especially in societies that are degenerating into crisis and conflict, since we know the breakdown of social contract can push countries into disorder and violence. But it's also important to remember that it's a self-reinforcing relationship. As we know from, there's been an interesting study commissioned by the UNDP on social contract in fragile situations that also supports the fact that the role of social contract usually depends on legitimacy and capacity of countries. So to wrap up, I'd like to point out that we still need more integrated knowledge about what it really means to address and reduce these existing inequalities in practice, and address different needs of the population on the ground in the shaping of social contract as we try to work in this complex environments. I'll stop here and I'll hand it over to you, Fatoumata, to introduce the next.
Okay.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Gulshan. Very interesting intervention about the social contract and linking it to fragility, not only state fragility, but also about institutions and how how the legitimacy is really important, and where we need also to build more and more knowledge about state fragility in fragile states and institutions. Thank you for that. I'm going to now invite Ibrahim Anyan, who will give a brief and practical assessment of the social contract while considering vertical and horizontal relationship. What are the new perspectives to address communities' need? So Ibrahim, those are some of the points that you are going to cover. You have the floor.
Merci beaucoup. Je commencerai par dire ce que j'entends par le contrat social. Pour moi, il s'agit d'un pacte entre citoyens, bien entre gouvernants et gouvernés, et ayant pour objet de remédier aux inégalités de la société par la justice, mais aussi de favoriser son bonheur en mettant l'homme au début et à la fin du développement. Je vais essayer de donner un bref état des lieux en Afrique de l'Ouest, puisque c'est dans la région où je vis. Je peux dire que de manière globale, le Covid-19, le terrorisme et encore la guerre en cours en Ukraine ont fini de montrer la fragilité de la sécurité humaine à tous les niveaux. Au niveau de la gouvernance politique, ce à quoi nous assistons en Afrique de l'Ouest, ce sont des alternances sans rupture ni alternative, ce qui signifie donc de manière claire des changements dans la continuité. Donc on peut dire qu'il n'y a pratiquement pas de changement. Il y a une fragilisation des institutions et de l'état de droit. On utilise la ruse pour rester ou bien pour accéder au pouvoir, et parfois la violence armée, comme les 2 mois passés nous l'ont montré, ou bien l'année passée et l'année en cours nous l'ont montré. Les tensions sociales, le terrorisme et l'insécurité sont à l'état endémique. Au plan économique, on peut constater que pratiquement, il y a de la croissance sans développement et une inégale répartition de ses fruits. La décentralisation politique, souvent, ne comporte pas de décentralisation économique. Ça ne va pas de pair. Or, ce n'était pas l'objectif de la décentralisation. Cette situation doit appeler des changements dans la gouvernance et c'est pourquoi je parle de la redéfinition des termes du contrat social. Si on est d'accord que la démocratie représentative n'est pas en faillite, si elle n'est pas en faillite en Afrique, du moins, elle semble avoir atteint ses limites. En tant qu'ancien fonctionnaire parlementaire, pendant plus de 30 ans, je crois que je suis très bien placé pour le constater. Cela est principalement dû à la perception de la hiérarchie des sources de légitimité des élus à tous les niveaux. Les gens pensent qu'ils tirent de légitimité du président de la République. D'autres pensent que c'est du parti, mais la légitimité populaire, elle est toujours en dernier lieu. Donc, il faut repenser le système représentatif en fonction des réalités propres à chaque pays. Il faut que les partis tendent vers une démocratie de concordance ou à défaut, une démocratie de convergence programmatique. Je soulèverai 2 points. Passer de la gouvernance verticale à la gouvernance horizontale. C'est restituer au peuple sa souveraineté en privilégiant les concertations par rapport aux directives, donc par rapport au gouvernement. Donc, en gouvernant par le peuple, c'est-à-dire, je donne des exemples concrets, l'État doit pouvoir faire des consultations préalables sur tous les grands sujets avant de saisir le Parlement. Ce faisant, les parlementaires, les élus locaux, quand il s'agit de délibérer, ils connaissent déjà la direction du vent. Ils connaissent ce que veut le peuple. Parce qu'on n'est jamais mieux servi que par soi-même. Les représentants ne font que représenter, mais ceux qui représentent savent, eux, ce qu'ils préfèrent. Gouverner avec le peuple, c'est définir des politiques publiques de la base vers le sommet et non le contraire. Les territorialiser et favoriser l'émergence de zones économiques homogènes et viables avec une fiscalité locale. Gouverner pour le peuple, c'est instituer un mécanisme consultatif inclusif pour une répartition plus équitable des fruits de la croissance, surtout en faveur des pauvres, et un autre mécanisme chargé de veiller sur la qualité de l'endettement de l'État. Il ne faut pas laisser l'État s'endetter comme ça pour des projets qui ne sont pas productifs. Et après, ce sont les générations futures qui vont payer les pots cassés. Donc, il faut mettre les communautés au début et à la fin du développement afin d'assurer la sécurité humaine dans toutes ses dimensions. Le deuxième point consiste à assurer la transparence et la redevabilité des gouvernants et des élus. En cela, je dis qu'il faut instituer l'évaluation conjointe qui met en scène les citoyens, les gouvernants, les partenaires au développement. Parce que chez nous, en Afrique, nous bénéficions beaucoup de l'aide des partenaires au développement. Donc, instituer cette évaluation conjointe de toute politique publique, de tout programme et projet, avant, pendant et après sa mise en œuvre. Le contrôle parlementaire étant souvent biaisé ou défaillant, systématisé par une législation appropriée ou alors encourager l'examen du projet de loi de finances. Quand je parle du projet de loi de finances, qu'il s'agisse de la loi initiale, qu'il s'agisse des lois rectificatives, qu'il s'agisse de la loi de règlement, par une commission citoyenne, ainsi que par la pratique des comptes rendus directs au niveau des populations, ce qui permet de recueillir leur avis, de réorienter les gouvernants. C'est le peuple qui vous dit, vous avez voulu faire telle chose pour moi, mais je préfère ça. Rappelez-vous, quand j'ai parlé des politiques publiques, les priorités, c'est les populations qui les définissent. Donc, c'est ce pouvoir de réorientation. Donc, ça permet aussi de nouer entre élus et gouvernants un dialogue permanent et fécond. Donc, en conclusion, je dirais que face aux vicissitudes de la démocratie représentative et aux incertitudes du monde actuel, il nous semble que la concertation et la redevabilité constituent les deux piliers sur lesquels doit reposer la gouvernance démocratique, laquelle assure la sécurité humaine.
Thank you very much, Ibrahima, for this very pertinent and interesting analysis. I think this is in line with what Guljan has covered about fragility in the countries. And also you raise the issue of the importance of activating human security and giving back the power to the people. And you also raise the issue of communities' participation and their empowerment. It is really important for government and for leaders to take in account what are the needs of the people and how the community should be involved in to improve and also make human security a reality. Now I would like to invite Kunjan to call the next speaker.
Thank you. Thanks, Fatimata, and merci bien, Ibrahima. I'd like to come to you, Zina, now for your perspectives from the Middle East and North African region. You have extensive knowledge about the region in addition to others, and especially working on the issues of social protection and empowerment and the human development. So what is the because the upheavals in the Middle East in 2011, they really prompted the need for redefining the social contract. So could you please explain or share your thoughts on what are the key challenges and how it is perceived in the region and the role of the international community?
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much, Guljan, and also for everybody here. It's a pleasure to be here with you. I think we had this discussion in preparation and also reflecting on how can we really rethink it within the MENA region. And before I start, I would just like to just highlight again that when we talk about the Middle East and the Arab world, that we have to remember that this covers a wide array of countries, each with a very distinct history and strong individual characteristics. And we have to always remember to make generalizations is always a form of oversimplification and would also not be fair to the specification of each country. However, we do recognize that a number of similarities do exist across the times for these countries. So for example, the Ottoman history, European colonization, the type of rule, which is mainly patriotic, language, religion, and to a lesser extent than actually many people think, culture. And of course, the 2010 wave of revolutions and the public outcries that have ended with mediocre results, if not outright failures by many accounts. So in this session, I would like to just briefly discuss three important elements that I feel are crucial to further reflect on and investigate how we could indeed reimagine the state-nation relationship, the social contract in the MENA region context to progress towards better human security. And the first one is really to focus on the social contract. And we've talked already about what the social contract entail. And here I have to highlight that the old social contracts in the MENA countries can arguably be described as based on what we call external rent income from oil or gas or phosphate, or maybe even geostrategic rents, for example, in the case of the Suez Canal for Egypt, remittances, and of course, development cooperation. Now, these contracts stipulated that the distribution of income to citizens through the provisions of guaranteed public goods, subsidies, free healthcare, education, and housing, and also different forms of social privileges, came at an expense of a lack of political participation and transparency in politics, in administration, and also the judiciary. But at the turn of the century, several aspects of this social contracts were beginning to disintegrate. Of course, you have the significant fiscal deficits that started to occur, and then the public sector, which was the so-called employer first and last resort, started retrenching. Now, we have a generation of young people who pursued rigorous education, were expecting to graduate to find better jobs and improve their situation, find themselves as part of this growing unemployed generation. And in addition to skills they accumulated, they find they're not suited for the private sector, which is growing not rapidly enough, but in the areas that it's witnessing expansive growth, their skills suffer from a severe mismatch. So we know now that countries in the Middle East and North Africa find themselves with the highest unemployment rates in the world, and with rates specific for the young people and women nearly double overall rate. Moreover, we know that from a lot of research that many people, especially young people, believe that these jobs and their chances are very much based on their connections rather than their merit, which adds also to the frustration. Now, in many contexts, the existing social contract has failed to provide what earlier generously was provided in this old social contract that I mentioned, free education, healthcare, and gradually starts to exclude more and more people. And here we see the legitimacy of the state becoming worn away by weak economic opportunities, increasing inequalities, favoritism. And so the Arab Spring comes as this demand for a new social contract. If you remember, it was not political reform, it was bread, freedom, and social justice. That's what it was calling for. And now, more than a decade later, we can argue that the forces that instigated the Arab Spring are really still there. Inequality, social justice have not improved. And one clear manifestation of this is the growing size of the informal sector. So for example, research tells us that in Egypt and Morocco, which are substantially two of the larger populations in the MENA region, have 70% of their employment in the informal economy. So my parting point here is for this particular social contract point is that in addition to the needed political reform, the challenge lies also in markets that are rarely considered in the discussion of political reform in the Middle East. And this unprecedented labor crisis confronting, of course, the world, but the region underscores this urgent need for this new social contract, which includes laws that define relationships between the state and the labor, as well as the political reform. So, and just to kind of put you in the mindset, what are we talking about? In order for the region's grim unemployment picture to start to improve, the region's government must actually create around 100 million new jobs over the next 15 years. So that, if you imagine, it requires overcoming immense obstacles to economic reform, including the labor market. Yet urgent economic changes will only be possible with political reform as well, where the governments must also reconsider their institutional capacity. Now, this is one point. The other point is citizen engagement and trade unions. Now, citizen engagement, as we know, is a mean to empower citizens and enable them to. And since 2011, the citizens in the MENA region asserted their rights for a more inclusive state. The state has to broker a new social contract to reflect to better reflect aspirations of the ordinary citizen who seek fair and equitable life, etc. But if we look actually at the recent ITUC Global Rights Index, the MENA region again is the worst in the world for the treatment of workers, and the current conflicts ongoing in many countries again have led to the breakdown of the rule of law, the denial of workers' rights, peaceful protests are violently repressed, and attempts to form an independent labor movements are always crushed. Now, we have to understand something here, that it's very difficult to understand, and we need to discuss, okay, what does that mean? That Arab trade unions actually find themselves in a very difficult position. On the one hand, we can explain this, that there's this what we call corpus legacy from the times of Arab socialism, when unions largely functioned as compliant mass organizations to the rulers, right? So it's a really different context than what we call Western multi-party democracy. And trade unions actually offered a legal framework for political organization, even in the state of in the face of state emergency. So we see now bans on meetings, controlled press freedoms, because it's hardly surprising that for Arab leaders, trade unions are actually potential opposition. And therefore, they have to attempt to curb this influence. Another thing is that it's also very important to understand that citizens also in the region seems very hesitant to engage politically. They're very pessimistic about their perceived rights to take part of the politics in the society. Voter turnout is an all-time low. Yes, that happens in a lot of countries as well, but there is no feeling of motivation that they do make a difference, and that is very alarming. However, on a positive note, this recent report by the Arab Barometer actually says that one way people feel that they are civically engaged is they still are willing to help people who are poor. So the majority in the people in the region actually report that they, from their own self, try to help some form of social justice by paying costs for poor people. And in that perspective, I think there's one maybe light that people want to, they just don't have the channels. My final point is the role of international organization. Now, the difficulty is that many donor countries and international organizations continue to support the notion of the old social contracts. The MENA governments are provided with generous loans and transfers, which rarely include support for the design and implementation of new social contracts. And in the long term, the region and the international community have a common interest in this new social contract. Let's take Europe, for example. If MENA governments continue to resist transparency and political participation, while at the same time failing to provide more economic growth, citizens will rebel again. And millions of people could try to flee these failing countries, and many of them will head towards Europe, of course, due to the proximity. Of course, it is unrealistic to only hope that the authoritarian regimes, which are also part of the solution and the problem, push for the modernization in the societies will resolve these deeply rooted problems over time. But donor countries that remain committed to liberal democracy can no longer only be concerned with how to stabilize existing political order. This is a very important point that we need to really push for. And one venue starts with the youth. To progress, we have to grasp that there is legitimate mistrust that especially the young generations in the region have towards not only the governments, but also the international donor community. The youth have potential, but they still lack the resources and the tools. And this brings me back to how I started. We have to also recognize that while the region is not homogeneous, the youth is also not homogeneous. So we need to also think gradually how that would be incorporated. You have, the youth is mixed from different groups based on gender and cohort and ethnicity and religion and sexuality and class. So there is no one size fits all. Donors and supporters of these processes must understand that the underlying mechanisms, the social structures and historical realities have to be taken into consideration. Otherwise, I'm afraid that they risk the reality that they, through the way they are, the process of assistance, become the core adversaries of the change that they assert that needs to come to pass, which also is alarming, not just for the youth in the region, but in my opinion, also the youth in the donor countries. Thank you. I will stop here.
Thank you, Zina. Thanks a lot. So over to our next speaker, Mrs. Haja Mominatu.
Yes.
Maybe prior to Hajia intervention, I would like just to mention that what Zina said is really interesting about youth, because youth is one of the actors that has severely impacted, and this is an aspect that Hajia too will cover. So it's really interesting to see not only about the MENA region and also in other regions and even globally, youth are concerned about the social contract and how they can be really involved and how there's a need to take measures and actions to improve and also encourage youth participation and engagement in the development of new policies. So Hajia, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Fatoumata. And indeed, this happens to be about my second point, actually, even though I'm going to be talking a little more about the situation in West Africa on that point. But first, I wanted to start with the actors of the social contract and how I think, just like Dr. Fatoumata said in the beginning, that they should be redefined completely. Because indeed, most of the time right now, we see the rulers and we see the rule, aka the government and the citizen. But we tend to forget that there is a whole middleman, a whole bunch of entities right from the middle that actually impact the social contract very heavily. And one of the examples of the social contract not being fulfilled to the best of its capacity because of the middleman is what happened with the Advanced Care Act implemented in 2010 by former US President Barack Obama. So that program really had a lot of potential. It had the potential to really completely fix most of the United States healthcare issues. Unfortunately, I would say mainly because of what I call the middleman, that didn't happen as well as it should have. So while a lot more people since 2010 have had access to a better healthcare system, there are still a lot of people that don't. And that is mainly due to the fact that insurance companies decided to increase their premiums while they were giving more services. That made it less accessible instead of making it more accessible. Then there is also the fact that government taxes had to go up because of that. And well, conservatives in the US were just not agreeable to that kind of situation. But one thing that really appealed to me the most was the fact that businesses decided to cut employee hours as a loophole in order to not have to cover their employees. So you see, that shows me that there are ways to find loopholes in the social contract, even though we believe that it's just between the ruler and the ruled. My second point was about the system and the inequalities that I see in it. So a saying that I really appreciate is goes as follows. It's a chain is only as strong as its weakest link. When people say that, usually what they mean is you need to make sure that whatever your most vulnerable link is should be what you really thrive to empower, to support, to make better, simply said. And unfortunately, in many West African countries, what happens is that link that should be strengthened, that should be supported, is not, because you have young adults who study abroad, then come home because they want to profit their country's economy, and they cannot start anything. They cannot start a new company. They have a hard time finding jobs because of the lack of infrastructures and the lack of financial support. They are confronted with a rigged system that ends up sabotaging its own population instead of helping it get better and do better. So now I'm just going to talk a little bit more about my personal beliefs. And that's because while I do believe that the social contract does need redefining, it does need a lot of changes. At the same time, I believe it's not the only thing that needs to be worked on, because there is one of the very well-known actors that I think needs to take a more active role in the social contract. Because when you accept to sacrifice some of your individual freedom to a ruling entity for social benefits and security, this does not mean that they have full responsibility over your fate. It means that you have a duty to yourself to make sure that they make the right choices. You have to make sure that whatever decisions they're taking is something that really is going to work towards the betterment of the whole community. And this is something that the Ed Foundation works towards. That's what we aim to do. We aim to help individuals and communities empower themselves through, among among other things, personal development. And we not only want to help people have better lives, but we want to give them the tools they need to get better lives and to better their lives themselves. And what we do is share information.
I'm sorry, Haja. We're just a gentle reminder about the time limit, and we're already running out of time. If you could please wrap up. Yes, if you could please wrap up, and then we can break into groups and discuss this more.
No problem. I only have 1 point left anyway, so it's perfect. So like I was saying, at the Ed Foundation, we share information, we organize webinars and everything. And we currently have a new program that is still in the seed projects. It's a workshop series that we are working on to blend networking, knowledge, and experience for new entrepreneurs. So hopefully I will have more time later on maybe to talk a little more about this. Otherwise, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Sorry, I had to interrupt, but thank you, Haja, for sharing your perspectives. I'll introduce our last speaker of the session. So I'll bring it over to you, Marina. I'm glad you were able to join us today on this conversation, and I know you have extensive experience of working in different countries of Africa and Eastern Europe and other regions on this SSR reforms and the peace building and peacekeeping operations. So we've heard our speakers talk about citizen engagement and human security and lack of transparency. And also Zina mentioned the working in the authoritarian regimes. Could you please share your perspectives of the social contract in different contexts?
Right, thank you, Gulshan. Well, the concept of social contract is rightfully attracting a lot of attention now, and I maintain it's relevant across all contexts as we see social contracts are under strain. Implicitly and explicitly, these social contracts are subject to pressures, and these strains are internal and external. They exist in let's say, an ecosystem of multiple compounding risks, whether divisive politics, toxic polarization in public debate, the use of misinformation by governments and by other actors to shape domestic and international opinion, deepening structural inequalities, and now the specter of economic recession for many countries. And these are combining with cross-border problems in our interconnected world, such as climate crisis, the pandemic. So all these geopolitical tensions now that we're seeing that are also undermining multilateral cooperation that are necessary to address global common problems. So I'd like to reflect on challenges to the social contract in 3 types of contexts, which, as you mentioned, I've worked in. And I maintain that the social contract is very closely related to the nature and quality of governance. And I'd like to very briefly give some examples of how I think the strains are showing, and particularly with regard to peace, security, and justice. So I've been working quite a bit on conflict-affected settings, particularly areas where UN stabilization operations have been deployed. And what's become very obvious to me in these settings is the mismatch between many of our, that is the global north or Western assumptions about the nature of governance and the social contract in those societies versus the reality. And we know from academic research, there's a lot of research that's been clearly setting out a hybrid nature of governance, where authority and legitimacy is not just the preserve of formal state institutions and governments, but may also be held by customary non-state informal actors. And in fact, those informal actors may actually primarily hold the authority and legitimacy in certain contexts. But despite this academic knowledge and the deepening of our understanding, it's not adequately reflected in policy. And the continued focus of multilateral institutions remains on the state and on state agents and on stabilizing the state, as Zina mentioned. So while there's been a general nod towards greater inclusiveness and diversity, such as in peace processes or the involvement of civil society, the main focus remains the state, on building capacity of the state without necessarily ensuring that those capacities respond to the needs of the population, of the entire population. And this is very problematic in contexts where state institutions are plagued by corruption, predatory behavior, or patronage networks, and where the state doesn't deliver public services equitably to all citizens. The next context that I look at is post-authoritarian contexts, in particular the post-communist states of Central and Eastern Europe. We know that there's a clear trend towards autocratization in the world now. VDEM has identified a record number of countries that are autocratizing, now comprising 33 states, or that account for 36% of the world's population. And we see this in several states that emerged from state socialism, where democracy has been eroded. Hungary and Poland, of course, come to mind, but there are others as well. And what's interesting to observe about these states is that many of them have the formal institutions and structures in place that we would consider to be for good governance, for good state-society relations. But the current regimes have undermined things like checks and balances, or have completely failed to transform into a culture of inclusive and accountable governance. So formal oversight structures may exist, but the spirit of oversight is not respected. For example, a refusal to share information about say, security services or government services, a refusal to be transparent and to share information with independent oversight actors. And the result is a facade of democracy, so with institutional forms and formal administrative capacity, but lacking the democratic political culture by regime figures and political elites that actually gives substance to those institutional forms. And lastly, I consider mature liberal democracies. Well, as mentioned by Graham Simpson in the plenary this morning, the social contract is not just an issue for conflict-affected or autocratizing states. It's very much a current topic for figures involved in, for example, economic affairs. Manoush Shafiq, who's director of the LSE, has come out with an interesting book on the need for a new social contract for the 21st century, where she says technological change and democratic change has really shifted the way citizens interact with their governments. And there's a need to, for example, create new social contracts that, for example, break the link between employment and healthcare provision. That it shouldn't be that you get health coverage only because you have a job that that gives you health coverage, as was just mentioned in the United States. But I want to focus on how this plays out in the security and justice realm, because to me, one of the most striking illustrations of a fraying social contract was the protest that erupted with the killing of George Floyd by police in Minneapolis in May 2020 and the Black Lives Matter movement. And of course, it wasn't a single killing. It represented a systemic pattern of structural racism and discrimination against African Americans in the United States. And this combined with a systemic lack of police accountability and effective oversight. And it resulted in massive protests in the United States. I mean, the protests were estimated at 15 to 26 million, the largest in US history. And the spread of those protests to virtually every other European country and many other countries around the world, all while a global pandemic was raging. And this to me epitomizes in the security and justice field, what a fraying social contract looks like. So public confidence in the police in the US dropped to its lowest level in 30 years, hitting 48% in 2020. And it spurred a debate on policing, inequalities, discrimination, and how public servants, in particular the police, but also the justice sector, interact with citizens from different groups. In conclusion, the social contract, again, is under strain in many places, many contexts. But I wanted just to end on a note about resilience, because often we assume that resilience is a positive thing in and of itself. But resilience can also be negative. The resilience or the stickiness of bad governance, the stickiness of lack of accountability, of structural inequalities. And I think that we need to recall this in thinking about policy solutions and going forward. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Marina, for your presentation and the different examples you gave. And thank you for sharing the example of the killing of George Floyd, because this is a relevant example about how the system failed to the citizen and how the system is not able to provide equal security to all the citizens. And it's also show how the actors are not able to perform equally and provide safety and security to the people. Thank you all for the presentations. Thank you for the insight, the great examples, and sharing different perspectives from different regions. But what we see is either the MENA region or West Africa, and even globally, the social contract matters. And it shows also from the different, your different interventions that the social contract, the way it has been defined, is not relevant anymore. And it needs to be reinvented. It needs to be redefined, and with a more binding, more realistic, that will take into account citizens' needs and also citizens' realities. Each country needs to come with their own challenges, security problems, and also the other sector, not only political and economical, but the mechanism that has been put in place really matters. And it is not only about the role of the government, of leaders to ensure an effective implementation of on the ground. Every actor is concerned, either the communities, parliamentarians, and all the citizens, and the youth are one of the groups that have been really impacted, and it's really important to consider the citizen engagement and participation in the new social contract. Now, what is really important is to think about democracies, principles and values, and good governance, and see how those principles can be implemented effectively through a more binding framework using human security approach that offer a framework for more transparency, for more accountability, and also about community and citizen engagement that are really important. But without, now what I want to say is I would like to give the floor to Kunjan, he's going to divide the participants into two group discussions, because this is really important, and we would like to hear from you we would like to not only about questions, but also have your own perspective, your own insight, analysis, how you see the social contract. Why do you think it matters? Why do you think it should change? So please, because we haven't seen a lot of questions or comment in the discussion button, but I would like to really invite you to not hesitate and really share your own experiences about the social contract. So Kuljan, you have the floor.
Sorry to interrupt really quickly. We have about 15 minutes left, and I just want to make sure that we respect the program for the rest of the day, but also really want to hear from the audience members here. So there's two options. We either just have an open Q&A now without the breakout groups and make sure that we can really hear from our participants, or we can do a very quick 2 breakout groups, but I'm worried that will take a little bit too much time. So I'm wondering if you want to just open up the floor, and we can encourage people here to turn your cameras on and create a space where people feel comfortable asking questions directly to the various panelists.
Yes, thank you, Melissa. Since we are 22, I think, yes, we can still stay at the plenary session and give the floor to the participants, so like they can share or make any comments. So the floor is yours.
Okay, at this time, I'd encourage people, if you want, you can go to the top right corner of your screen and just click gallery view so that you can see everyone. And if you're a participant here, it'd be great if you turned on your camera. It creates a little bit of a warmer environment for people to ask questions. And we encourage you to just raise your hand at the bottom of your screen. You can click raise hand and you can ask your question directly. You can also ask it anonymously if you want to type it directly to me. But the floor is yours. We'd love to create a bit more of a discussion environment now that we've heard from all of the many interesting speakers.
Thank you, Melissa. Okay, everyone, just please. We would like to hear from you. Any questions, comments? And also activate your micro because we cannot hear you if you are muted.
So just as the audience is thinking of the questions or the inputs from we got from speakers, there was a question from Wessel Tunen on the engagement of the international community and how could external actors, for instance, the foreign diplomats, contribute to improving human security in ways that are currently unexplored. So I've offered some reflection that, yes, it's the human, we've already heard from the speakers that the citizen perspective and the human security and is becoming at the core of understanding the social contract. We know specifically in the fragile context, we know there's been different agreements like the Paris Declaration or the New Deal of engaging with fragile countries. And in their implementation, the countries have put the human security perspective at the core of their development strategies. But I would also like to encourage others to share their reflections on this question.
Okay, thank you, Kuljan. I have also one other question here who asked, okay, hello, could I please ask Marina to expand a little on her final point about resilience and the potential negative of that focus, especially, let me look at that, especially with the focus on local, I cannot see it, on local resilience by many donors that day. So Marina, could you just react to that, please?
Yeah, gladly. Thanks, Leanne, for the question. And my point actually sprung from my examination of these stabilization environments. And I was quite struck by some insiders for the UN asking themselves why, after, let's say in the case of the DRC, many years of UN presence and billions of dollars going into efforts to stabilize and reconstruct the state and build peace, has it been in effect such a failure? Why has there been an incredible increase in the number of armed groups and the stabilization of the number of armed groups and the continuation of conflict? And why is the international community not succeeding at actually moving the needle in such environments? And one of the theories, and this has been put forward by Adam Day in a great book, where he tries to look at how systems theory might provide some insights. And this is where the idea of a kind of resilient system where actually inputs from the UN and from the international community actually become part of that reinforcing system. And so not fully understanding how this ecosystem, the incredible complexity of it, but also the incredible ability of it to stabilize and to let's say, resist efforts to change, whether through institutional forms or putting in money in particular places or through particular programs. The argument is that we really don't understand enough about how these complex systems function, and that the fact that we're still making assumptions about linear change, and that this is absolutely proving to be not the case. And so it's a plea, I think, for much greater analytical sophistication and ability to try to understand the various factors at play, which in part is also about all of the informal actors and the networks of influence and of power that operate in these environments. And it's not just about the state, and the state might actually be a rather minor part of the equation.
Okay, thank you, Marina. Another question: how could external actors like foreigners, diplomats contribute to improving human security in ways that are currently unexplored? Who would like to take the floor? Maybe Kai, do you want to intervene?
Yes, though I was still on the previous question. I was trying to do a little bit of the synthesizing role. Apologies if this becomes a digression, but I wanted to use what Marina started here as a launching pad for a broader discussion of the role of other actors than the state. You kind of touched upon that yourself, Marina, now after I had raised my hand here, but I do think that that's a theme that connects several of the presentations. So you were talking about the potential resilience of a problematic system, and I would like you to maybe expand a little bit on how that is related to an excessive focus on the state or potential excessive focus on the state, and a lack of encouragement of other actors, and perhaps use that as a launching pad for linking that to some of the other presentations, which I think could be done well.
Okay, thank you. Marina, would you like to react? And I also see Giorgio has raised his hand.
Sure. So I think part of the problem is that we're being let's just say international actors, the multilateral institutions are very myopic in terms of seeing the state as sort of the repository of legitimacy, but also the main agent for transformation in societies. And I think it ignores a lot of things about informal networks, about the informal economy, about how actually about livelihoods, about how people try to sustain themselves within these, let's say, fragile, conflict-affected contexts where the state is practically absent or plays a very minor role, and where, in fact, there may be all types of informal economic activities, including ones that many in the North would consider, for example, criminal flows or organized crime. And so trying to better understand, I guess, the realities of trying to subsist in an extremely fragile but complex environment where economic flows, whether within the state or often cross-border, are a means of survival for many local communities. And so this is part of what I mean by an excessive focus on the state, because there's so much more going on, and just focusing on the state agency, this is a lot of what, in fact, the average person has to contend with in a very difficult and fragile environment.
Okay, thank you, Marina. Giorgio, do you have a question?
Yeah, I do have a question, please. So I work for the KPSRL, and as part of my job, we do have a role as learning partner for the Somalia, for the Dutch embassy in Somalia. So, and we are going to have an event quite soon in Somaliland focused on a program whose objective is strengthening the social contract in Somalia. So my question would be, what sort of advice would you give to programming partners who are working in a context like Somalia or Somaliland to strengthen the social contract, keeping in mind the extreme fragility context that Marina was talking about, the presence of actors, for example, rebel actors, should they be involved, not involved in this sort of processes, and also the economics of a sanction regime that is still in place and is also having an impact on local business, both in Somalia and in Somaliland. So yeah, any advice, any recommendations would be super appreciated on this topic. Thank you.
Thank you, Giorgio. Anyone would like to take, one of the speakers would like to answer the question of Giorgio? Okay, I'll go first. Okay, Zina, go ahead. No, go ahead first.
No, I think this is exactly the issue here is that, I mean, I think the challenge is twofold in my opinion. And I think, of course, I come from the social policy and public policy when we're talking about, you know, the basic levels of inequality. I think a very important point is that where is the society also when it comes to at the moment, where is their position when it comes to the basic needs, and how are they doing in terms of also the issue of minimum subsistence. And here I'm talking because of you bring in the issue of in the case of Somalia, you're talking also about the component of disaster risk management as well. And I think one of the biggest issues here is that there's twofold. There's the part where you need to really understand who are sort of the ones that are losing mainly in the sense of basic needs, well-being. You know, you're talking about health and education and food, you know, the very minimum basic. And then once you understand how that is spread out, it will give you an idea of really who is able to make this conversation, who is able to have this discussion. Just the quick point, I think one of the biggest issues, I think, with the MENA region, which people also underestimate, is that there are a lot of constituents who want to partake in the discussions of the social contract, but they are in such a position, they are so weakened. And I think this is very important for a point that Marina had said. The international community's assistance to support state resilience and to states to be stronger has actually created this sort of vacuum sometimes of where the people that really want to partake in improving the society aren't even at a level of the minimum well-being standards to be able to partake, because they're so concerned with you know, basic subsistence of food and education and all of these things. And I think a step before how do we incorporate that is to also understand how does that look like? And I mean, I think in the case of Somalia, we have a lot of political issues, but I would even start at the very basic and then see how is that mapped? How does it look like? Even before you even think who the rebels are. That would be something I think is very important.
We are running out of time. Okay, sorry, I'm really sorry, because, you know, when we're talking about the social contract, there are so many things that we can discuss about, but we only have 3 minutes remaining, and we would like to hear from one last word for each speaker. Just one last word, please, 2 or 3 seconds before we wrap up with one quick poll. So let's start by Ibrahima. Quickly, please, your last word. Activate your micro. Ibrahima, okay. Zina, could you just start while Ibrahima is activating his micro? Could you, your last word, please?
D'accord, c'est l'administrateur qui avait coupé mon son, voilà.
Ok, assez rapidement, juste 2 secondes.
Oui, pour moi, l'avènement d'un contrat social juste et équitable est une lutte de longue haleine, et qu'il faut toujours consolider sous peine de remise en cause. Et je pense que les organisations de la société civile ainsi que les médias doivent jouer un rôle d'avant-garde. Voilà.
Okay, Zina?
Yes, I just think that the importance of focusing on the youth, and also giving back to Marina's point, what are we doing in really fortifying state actors when they're not just the only ones that are important to look at.
Okay, thank you. Hadja?
I think we need to think about the social contract a little bit like a seed that really needs to be nourished in order to grow. So instead of just talking about it, we need to all really act a little more.
Thank you very much, Mary. Thank you, Marina.
Yes, and just picking up from what Zina was just mentioning before she ended was basic needs, that it's really about people's basic needs and how are they being met.
Okay, thank you. Koljan?
Yes, just quickly, thank you all for your reflections and sharing your insights and knowledge on this topic. But personally, I think it was all very interesting, and especially the point of resilience and its possibility of being negative. Actually, it's very thought-provoking, and I'll take it personally further in my work, as I'm seeing in the way we understand and measure fragility. This is the element that's become increasingly adopted by the international community. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I just want to thank everyone, speakers, participants, the tech host, and for this platform. So thank you very much. Really sorry that we are running out of time. And Liliana, thank you for the second poll. And so thank you for your participation, insight, sharing your experiences. Looking forward to continue this at some other places and spaces. Thanks a lot.
Thank you for joining. Thanks a lot.
Thank you for joining. Thanks a lot. Okay, bye-bye.
Thanks, bye.